We've had a lot of requests to test the Kill Devil Icon Powerstroke heads. Ever since Power Driven released our CNC-ported iron 6-liter heads, our comments have been blown up by you guys saying, what do the Icon heads flow? I hear that as cast they flow better. Even on Kill Devil's website, they claim that the Icon heads outflow any ported iron head on the market. So today, we're gonna find out. For this test, we're gonna compare the cost of these heads. We're going to compare the weight, the valve springs, and last but not least, the flow of all these heads. There's another contender on the market. ProMax also has an aluminum Powerstroke head. So we're going to test the ProMax aluminum Powerstroke head, the Power Driven Stage 1 toe-ported head, the Kill Devil Icon as-cast head, and the Power Driven Stage 2 hot street head. By the end of this video, you should know which head is the right option for your truck.
All right, guys, time out, cut. You got to help me out here real quick. I want to know, which head do you think is the best? Before Will drops all this data on your heads, go to the comments below and tell me which one do you think is the best. While you're there, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and we are back to the show.
Guys, before we hop on the flow bench, we need a good baseline. Right here I have a stock cylinder head, came off a running truck about 2 weeks ago, has about 250,000 miles on it. Pretty representative of what you're gonna find on a used Powerstroke out there in the market. The intake ports are nasty. I'm not going to put that filthy sludge through my flow bench. So I'm at least going to hose it out with some brake clean before I put it on the flow bench. All right, when we're flow testing, it's important. We got to plug the injector hole and the glow plug hole. So I have an old Powerstroke glow plug cut down. I have an old 24 valve Cummins injector with some clay on the end. So a lot of guys, when they're cheating on the flow bench, they leave these holes open to make it flow more. Not here. Accurate testing. Okay, final thing, there's normally an intake manifold bolted on here. So we want to smooth that transition to make it act like it has an intake manifold. So I've got some clay here. It's going to kind of mimic the factory intake manifold. Gives us the best possible flow numbers. All right, so what is a flow bench? It's basically a big industrial vacuum cleaner that can suck and blow. So when you are doing intake testing, you put on the suck mode. When you are doing exhaust testing, you put on the blow mode. So we're going to start on the exhaust, so this thing's going to blow. All right, so when we're using the flow bench, we map the flow at different valve lifts. The way this opens, there's a dial indicator on the flow bench here. As I turn the dial indicator down, it opens the valve a set amount. We get a reading, we record it, then we go more lift, until we go through the whole range of valve motion. Everyone likes to focus on the peak flow numbers of a cylinder head, and peak flow sells heads, but the real way that you make power is making lift everywhere in the curve. So the head that flows the most on average throughout the whole lift range always makes more power. So this stock used head peaked out at 132 CFM on the exhaust side. All right, so this stock used head peaked out at 144 CFM, and the Swirl was negative 3,700 RPM. So quite a bit of swirl, much higher than a Cummins. The flow, it's about like a 12 valve Cummins, honestly. As of filming, a pair of these ProMax aluminum heads run $4,000. So what do you get for $4,000? First thing I noticed, there are O-rings. Any high-performance diesel, head gasket sealing is important, and the Powerstroke is known for blown head gaskets. It's a good thing these have O-rings. As I pulled the valve springs off here, I noticed they're a little bit heavier. You get 100-pound valve springs. When I ran these across the dyno, they're about 109 pounds on the seat. That's because their retainer drops the installed height a little bit, which is fine. A little more seat pressure never hurt anything. So I ran this across the scale, and it's 31 pounds. The stock head is 71 pounds. Also, the ProMax listing shows that these heads flow 25% more intake and exhaust. So we're going to run this on the flow bench and see if the intake and exhaust are 25% higher than stock. Finally, ProMax advertises these heads as having a multi-angle valve job. What does a multi-angle valve job do for you? It tremendously helps the low lift flow numbers of the cylinder head. Low lift numbers are important, especially on a Powerstroke where the cam only lifts the intake valve around 300 thousandths. So I expect the 50, 100, and 150 numbers to be much higher than the stock heads. Let's get this on the flow bench and see what it does. All right, let's start with the ProMax head. All right, we're gonna start at 50 thousandths of valve lift. All right. All right, now we're going to 100 thousandths of valve lift. All right, 44. All right, we're at 150 thousandths valve lift. 83. All right, we're going to 200 thousandths of valve lift. All right, 121. All right, guys, I had to stop flowing this at 200 valve lift. This ProMax head is disappointing. Has a nice looking valve job, but it sure doesn't flow. The stock head at 50 lift flowed 42 CFM. This one flowed 24. When you're developing a port, the very first thing that I do is I focus on those low lift numbers. When you're trying to fill a cylinder on an engine, it doesn't matter if it's a tow engine or a race engine, there's a race between how much air you can move by the valve and how fast the piston's moving down. You don't want to give the piston a head start on the air battle. You want to start the air moving just as soon as the piston starts moving. At 100 lift, 76 CFM on the stock head, this one flows 44. Still, I mean, we're down like 30 CFM here. This is ridiculous. At 150, 107 CFM on the stock head, 83. Even up at 200, this head is still down 4 CFM over the stock head. So this head is way behind on the race. So if you want a good head, in my experience, on the dyno, or making horsepower or low EGT towing, you need a head with really good low lift numbers. This brings up the whole airflow average, especially on an engine with a stock camshaft that only lifts 300. You can't be losing the battle to 200 and expect to gain any kind of performance, EGT control, or anything. I'm gonna continue flowing this for the rest of the numbers, but through the magic of editing, we've got to jump over the exhaust side and see what the heck is the exhaust flow in this. Does the exhaust at least flow more? Remember, ProMax advertised 25% gain. All right, we're gonna flow the exhaust now on the ProMax head. So let's start at 50 lift, 50 thousandths that is. All right, 39 CFM at 50 lift. Okay, that's 100 lift. It looks like it's flowing about 73 CFM. All right, that's 150 valve lift. It looks like 94 CFM. Okay, it's 200 valve lift. Looks like 107 CFM. All right, so better news on the exhaust side than the intake. At 100, the stock old head flowed 41, and this one flows 39, so it's just down a tiny bit. At 50, 74, 73, so you're basically even with the stock. At 150, 92, and the ProMax picks up 2, it's at 94, and at 200, 108, 107. So basically, this ProMax head is matching the stock flow characteristics of a worn out iron head. So better news, but not good news. Hopefully it picks up some flow on the top end. Otherwise that 25% gain is kind of bogus. All right, the numbers are in on this ProMax head. It did pick up a little more on the top end. Stay tuned to the end to see all the numbers and all the data. But I'm gonna pull one of our production stage 1 towing ported iron heads off the shelf, unbox it, and put it on the flow bench because I think it will beat this ProMax head, which is sad because it's like half the price.
All right, man, this is good. Oh, you got it.
This is the Power Driven Diesel Stage 1 tow-ported iron 6-liter Powerstroke head. As of filming, a pair of these runs $2,500. So what do you get for $2,500? Well, first off, you get O-rings. Every hard-working tow truck, especially 6-liter Powerstrokes, need O-rings to seal those head gaskets. Also, hard-working trucks, boost goes a little higher, sometimes RPM goes high on the grade, you need upgraded valve springs. So we've included 100-pound valve springs, no extra charge on this head. What else do you get on this head? You get a CNC port job. We run these through our Rottler CNC. We give these a mild toe port job that has high swirl and really picks up the coefficient of discharge of these valves. Finally, we do a nice multi-angle valve job to really help those low lift flow numbers. These heads are awesome. I can't wait to show you what they do on the flow bench. All right, stage 1 tow head. All right, we've got the stage 1 tow port on the flow bench. Let's see what it flows at 50 lift. All right, looks like 49. All right, there's 100 lift. Looks like 91. Okay, there's 150 lift. It's like about 124. All right, there's 200 valve lift. So it looks like 149. All right, let's do the exhaust. Let's start at 50 lift. All right, we're at 42. Okay, there's 100 lift. 74. Okay, there's 150 lift. We're at 95. Okay, we're at 200 lift. Looks like 111. All right, so we finished flowing the stage 1 CNC tow port, and it delivered. These low lift numbers are incredible. The stock head, remember, it flowed 42 CFM at 50 lift. This one flowed 49. It just gets better as you go up. At 100 lift, 91 on this tow port. Stock head, 76. So where the ProMax was way behind the stock head, this Power Driven stage 1 port is way ahead. This isn't from the CNC porting. The CNC porting is going to show up on the top end, so stay around to the end to see that. All of these results are from the awesome valve job our guys did on this head to make it move the air where it matters. This is the Kill Devil Icon 6-liter Powerstroke head. Let's take a closer look at it. As of filming, a pair of these with the 100-pound upgraded valve springs that you should have on a performance head is $3,825. So what do you get for $3,800? First thing I noticed, O-rings. Every performance diesel needs good head gasket sealing. Also, I've noticed the ports on these, they're a little bit different than the others. On the Icon listing, they say they've redesigned the ports to make these swirl more than stock. So we're gonna test that on the flow bench. They even claim 82% more swirl than ported stock iron heads. We're definitely gonna have to test that out. They also claim that these flow 24% more than stock. Finally, weight savings. Kill Devil's website says you save 75 pounds with a pair of these. We weighed these. These heads weigh 35 pounds. All right, time for the Kill Devil Icon head. Guys, first thing I noticed, my clay that helps the air guide in there is a little too small. So these ports are actually a little bit bigger. I'm kind of excited. Let's see how much this thick girl flows. All right, that's 50 thousandths lift. Looks like 31 CFM. It does have good swirl though. The highest I've seen at that lift, 2,000 RPM swirl. All right, there's 100 lift. Let's see what it flows. Okay, looks like 59 CFM. Whoa, 2,900 RPM of swirl. Check that out. Pretty good swirl. Okay, we're at 150 thousandths lift. It's flown 102 CFM. Okay, that's 200 thousandths lift. Looks like it's flown 144 CFM. All right, let's talk about the low lift numbers on this Kill Devil Icon head. 31 CFM at 50, 59 at 100. It's actually a little ways behind the factory head. Remember the factory head was 42 and 76. This one's 31 and 59. So unfortunately, as cast and the valve job they provide on these, the low lift numbers aren't looking that strong. When we get the valve up a little higher, up around 200, this thing gets up to 144 CFM, which leaves the stock head behind by like 15. So this head does show promise. Stay tuned to the end to see what this thing actually flows on the top end. I think you're going to be surprised. All right, we're at 50 valve lift. Looks like we're at 38 CFM. All right, we're at 100 valve lift. Looks like 61 CFM. All right, that's 150 valve lift. 88 CFM. All right, we're at 200 valve lift. 116 CFM. All right, we finished at the flow numbers on the Kill Devil Icon head. It flowed quite a bit better than the ProMax on the bottom end. Where did it end up on the top end? Stay tuned to the end to see those final flow numbers and graphs. You're going to be surprised where this head peaked out. But now we have to know, what does the Stage 2 hot street ported power driven head flow? So let's put it on the flow bench and find out. This is the Power Driven Diesel Stage 2 hot street CNC ported cylinder head. As of the time of filming, these heads are $3,100. So what do you get for your $3,100? First off, you get a CNC O-rings. It's important to have O-rings on a hot rod diesel. Second, these come with upgraded 100-pound valve springs. You need upgraded valve springs for higher RPM and higher boost. Third, these come with a nice multi-angle valve job. Really helps with that valve sealing. Finally, this comes with our Stage 2 hot street port. You're going to be shocked with how well these heads flow on the flow bench. All right, Power Driven Stage 2 hot street port. Freaking crazy. All right, we got the Power Driven Stage 2 hot street port on the flow bench. Let's see what it does at 50 thousandths lift. All right, 48. All right, there's 100 thousandths lift, and looks like we're flowing 87. Okay, so there's 150 lift. All right, there's 200 valve lift. Looks like we're flowing 148. All right, guys, let's take a look at the Power Driven Stage 2 hot street head. Let's look at the low lift numbers. At 100, we're flowing 48. Remember, the stock head was flowing 42. At 100, the stock was 76. This one's 87. So we're still up substantially. At 150 lift, we're flowing 120. At 200 lift, we're flowing 148. So we're well over the stock head. We're kind of right on par with our toe port. What we found is when we really open up the throat on these to really help that top end flow, we can't gain as much on the bottom end with that aggressive valve job. But stick around to the end. You're going to be blown away at the high lift numbers. Over 200 CFM on this head. All right, now we're going to do the exhaust on the Power Driven Stage 2 hot street head. We're going to start right at 50 thousandths lift. All right, that's 50 thousandths lift. All right, looks like we're flowing 41 CFM. Okay, we're at 100 thousandths lift. Looks like we're flowing 73 CFM. All right, we're at 150 valve lift. Looks like we're flowing 93 CFM. All right, we're at 200 valve lift. Looks like we're flowing 111 CFM. All right, we finished flow testing the Stage 2 hot street head. Let's wrap this up. Let's put all the numbers on a big chart. Should you buy that aluminum head for your race truck, or should you go with a ported iron head? Does your tow truck need aluminum head, or is it better with a ported iron head? Let's check out all the data. All right, guys, we got all the numbers from the flow bench, and I imported them into some Excel spreadsheets so that we can compare, contrast numbers. Right here, this is the valve lift. So we start at 50 thousandths. We open the valve all the way to 800 thousandths. This is the CFM that it flowed. So this is your CFM chart. This is the valve lift chart. And this here is your swirl RPM. That's how much the air mass is swirling. This is the exhaust flow. And as you can see, it goes higher. So the exhaust peaked out at 132 CFM. The intake peaked out at 144 CFM. I've got some nice graphs here to help you visualize. Essentially, as the valve lifts more, the flow goes up until you kind of hit the limits of the port, around 140, 44 CFM on the stock. And the exhaust, the same thing. As the valve lifts higher, it flows more, and it kind of peaks out in this range here. So now let's see how this compares on the ProMax head. All right, so now we've got the ProMax head up here. How did it compare to the stock head? Well, right here we're looking at the flow chart. So once again, valve lift all the way to 800 thousandths. This is the stock numbers. This is the ProMax. So you can see it peaked out at 21% higher peak flow, but it kind of struggled in the low lift areas. It didn't really match the stock head until after 200 valve lift, which you can see on the intake chart here. See, the ProMax head is the gray line, and see, we get up here around 200 is where it finally crosses the flow of the stock head. What that means generally to a head designer is the valve job sucks. They did not tune that venturi. When the valve opens, the airflow has a dynamic as it's flowing across the valve seat. If you don't get all those angles and things perfect, you will lose flow like we're seeing on the ProMax head. The valve job on the ProMax head looks beautiful to the eye. It's one of the best looking valve jobs on there, but it didn't perform. Swirl. The ProMax head, look at this, 4,400 RPM of swirl. Now we didn't talk about it on the stock head, but if you go back and look, that was 3,900 RPM. So they have more swirl RPM. There's a swirl meter on the flow bench. It just measures how fast the whole column of air is swirling in that cylinder. Swirl's good. That's that mixture motion that kind of helps blend the diesel with the air charge, helps reduce idle haze, and just helps a little bit with efficiency. So swirl is good. More swirl, obviously in ProMax's opinion, is better. The exhaust side, dang, they're down 5%. So their exhaust never even met the stock flow anywhere. If you look on the graph, their valve job is very similar to the stock. You can see their curve is even, and then around 200 lift, the stock head pulled away from it. So once again, this is going to be more choked up on the exhaust. It's probably not going to spool the turbo as well. It's going to have higher EGT. And with this gain so late, I'll bet you when we compare this on the big chart, you're going to be kind of disappointed with the ProMax head. Now remember guys, the ProMax head was advertised as 25% more flow than stock. 21%, it's within the margin of error. I think that that's not false advertising, but they said intake and exhaust, and their exhaust is down 5%. So their exhaust is nowhere near, it's a downgrade. The intake on the top end, it does flow more because it peaks out at 174 CFM, which compared to our stock head at 144, it's a 21% increase. And the swirl increased a little bit. So that's all the good I can say about this head. All right, now I have the Power Driven Stage 1 CNC toe-ported head. Now this is an iron head that we CNC port here in-house. How does it stack up? Well, right at the peak, we are 22%. So it's just a little bit better than the ProMax on the top end. And exhaust flow, we're up 8%. So we're up over stock, hooray. Let's look at the data a little bit closer here. The low lift numbers were up substantially. See 49 CFM at 50, 91 at 100. I mean, we are killing it down low. Low lift numbers are extremely important, especially when you have a cam that only lifts the valve about 300 thousandths. So all of your flow is coming from this part of the graph this way. The more area under the curve, this is where you're gonna feel that spool up difference, that EGT control. Everything matters in the low lift numbers. So we've focused on the valve job of these heads to make them flow as good as possible. I could make this peak number go up higher by hurting low lift numbers. In my experience, every time we trade low lift numbers for peak flow, we actually lose horsepower. So we're very careful as we are developing a port to never sacrifice the low lift numbers for a high peak number. Makes you feel good. The flow chart looks great up there. But to be honest with you, all of the power is made on this part of the graph. So you can see here the low lift numbers, we're just destroying. I mean, we're up almost 20 CFM at 150 lift. I mean, that's huge, huge gains there. We still maintained excellent swirl here. We're at 3,600 RPM. So we're down slightly on the stock and swirl. In our experience, over 3,000 swirl is all you really need on a lot of these things. And the Ford head, just by its design, it likes to swirl. So we ended up there 3,600. The stock head flows pretty good. It has a pretty good exhaust valve job, mostly because it has such a small valve. It's undervalved, as they would say in this industry. And so the factory tried to get those stock valves to flow as much as they could on the exhaust side with the limited real estate they had. And so it's hard to beat it, but we did by 150 lift, we did start pulling away from the stock head. As you can see, took a little while before the blue power driven graph starts pulling away from the stock yellow there. All right, so up next we have the Kill Devil Icon as cast aluminum 6-liter heads. Once again, we put all the data on a spreadsheet so we can check it out. Let's start right here on the intake. So here's the stock, here's the Kill Devil. The Kill Devil is behind 11 CFM at 50 lift. They're behind a bunch at 100. At 150, they're about even. Around 200 valve lift, they start passing the stock head and pulling away. How far did they go? Well, at the end here, this Kill Devil head peaked at 197 CFM. Very impressive. That's a big flow number. That's a 37% increase over our stock head. Now keep in mind, Kill Devil advertises 24% over stock. So in fact, they've exceeded. As far as flow numbers, they provided what they advertised. Much better than the ProMax head. As far as swirl, Kill Devil's really big on swirl. That's all of their marketing literature on the head, is how they've redesigned the port. In fact, we saw that they have hooked the port opposite direction to make it swirl. How does it compare to the stock head? Well, they're behind there. They're slightly up at 100, 150. They're even at 200. At 250 lift, they're behind again. Swirl is kind of a weird thing. This whole air mass is just a big swirling air mass, so it kind of trades off. But you can see it's not till about 350 lift that they start pulling away from the stock head on Swirl. And up on the top end, they got to 4,500 RPM. That's great. However, the stock cam never lifts in that range. In the useful lift range of the engine, I would say that this head is very equivalent in Swirl to the stock head that we flowed. Yeah, it swirls great on the top end, but I don't even know if it matters. All right, let's talk about the kill devil exhaust. Now, right here at 50 valve lift, 38 versus 41 on the stock, they're behind. By 100, they fall quite a ways behind, 13 CFM. So this kill devil port does not flow well at low lift on the exhaust side. It's not until we get to 200 that they start pulling away. You can see on the exhaust chart up here, around 200, they solidly start pulling away, and that port actually flows quite well. 156 CFM, it's a solid 18% increase over the stock. So the top end of the kill devil, the overall port design is pretty good, but it looks like they could use some more work in the valve job or the bowl blending area. And remember, this is as cast. Those things can all be addressed very easily with some CNC porting. So I would imagine that when you get a CNC ported kill devil, it probably has better exhaust flow in that low lift region. Overall, it's a very solid head, great performer. I can see why this is popular, why a lot of people like this head. All right, here is the Stage 2 CNC hot street ported power driven head. Now this is an iron head that we poured in-house. Now this is designed more for those hot street trucks, not so much the towing and lower performance things. So we're chasing flow numbers on this head. If you see right here at low lift, 48 versus 42, we start right from the get-go with an excellent valve job. We pick up a ton of flow. Right here at 150, just look at the graph. We start and we just pull away the whole way. This intake is awesome. It peaked out at 213 CFM. That's a 48% increase. Now, what's the downside of all this flow? We are giving up some swirl RPM. You can see we only peaked out at 2,900 RPM on the swirl. Remember, the stock head was 3,900, so we gave up 1,000 RPM of swirl. And then down in the low lift range where the actual cam works, we're only up there about 1,000 RPM of swirl. Remember, some of these other heads were up there, 2,500 in that range, 3,000 almost. So we have traded swirl for that. So if you're looking for a truck that doesn't have idle haze and something that you tow, this isn't necessarily the head for you. This is a more performance-oriented cylinder head. All right, now let's look at the exhaust on this Stage 2 head. You can see we match the stock flow very closely within one number or so, up to 150. At 200 valve lift, we start pulling away. And as you can see on the graph here at 200, we really start pulling away. This exhaust is awesome. It peaks out at 162 CFM, 23% increase. So now let's overlay all of these on one chart and let's see how they all compare with each other. All right, so now I've got all 5 cylinder heads overlaid on the same graph. Now this is the intake flow. So I've got all of the flow numbers charted out. These are the same numbers we looked at before, but here's how they overlay on a graph comparing. And once again, valve lift is on the bottom. As you go further this way, the valve lift's higher. Further up this way is more CFM. The stock cam lifts a little over 300 thousandths. So I kind of want to focus on this bottom half of the graph. You'll notice both of the aluminum heads are down in the low lift numbers. The stock one is this blue line in the middle. So the stock head beats both of these heads, to like 150, beats the ProMax to 200. So looking at this, I don't see any way the ProMax is going to beat a stock head with a stock camshaft. There's just not enough real estate there. You get into this higher lift range and some of those bigger numbers come in and matter, but this is just purely the valve job. You can tell the overall port of the ProMax is better than stock because it peaks better. When the valve's all the way open, the valve job's not nearly as important. It's just the raw flow through the port and there's other aspects than just the angles on the valve job. There's other stuff there, but in general, the ProMax is a better design than stock, as you can see. In fact, it's very similar in port design to the Power Driven Stage 1. We end up dang near the same peak. However, the valve job on the Stage 1 Power Driven is way better. That's why it has all of this meat under the curve, which is what you're going to notice on the street. That's what's going to spool the turbos faster. It's going to make more power, better EGT control. It's just win-win-win when the head flows better. Looking at the Kill Devil here, starts kind of slow, but look, it passes here at 200. I mean, it's screaming up there. Excellent port design on the Kill Devil head. Great top end flow. If they could work a little bit on the bottom end here, this head would just be a rocket. I still believe it's better than stock because it gains so much so quickly about midway through the lift of the valve. It makes up for that, and then the Swirl's pretty good as well. But I mean, the real champion here, obviously, you might think I'm biased, but this ported Power Driven Stage 2, boom. It's got excellent port design up top. It starts strong at the bottom. So when we're trying to make efficient power on an engine, there's a race between the piston racing down and the head, what it can flow to fill that void. So when we're looking at airflow charts, it's fun to look up at the peak and see how much. It's great advertising numbers, but the truth of the matter is, the most important part of the flow graph is the low lift numbers in the range where the cam is actually lifting the valves. So let's check that out. So I've added up all the flow numbers in the range that the factory camshaft actually lifts these heads so that we can compare them. So I have numbers at 350 lift and at 400 lift. So the stock cam lifts 315 thousandths on the intake side. So if we add up all the numbers up to 350, they end up in this chart right here. And I've overlaid them over here. So at 350, the total flow of the ProMax is 744 CFM. The stock head is 759. And this is what I was saying, although the ProMax flows more than the stock head, because it's so far behind in that race, it actually never passes it within the lift range of the cam. The Kill Devil Icon ended up at 881, so substantially better than the 744 of the ProMax or the stock. But look, the PDD Stage 1 ended up at 907, just a little bit better than the Kill Devil with a factory cam. And then the PDD Stage 2 head ended up at 958. The reason that ended up so high is it has good low lift numbers and it really starts screaming up on the top end. But what if you have an aftermarket cam? The biggest drop-in cam, like a Stage 2 Colt, lifts at 350 thousandths. So all these numbers would be the same for a stock or drop-in. You get like a Stage 4 race cam, they open the valve 400 thousandths. So what happens if we put 400 thousandths in our measurements here? So the 400 totals are right here on the bottom. We've got 400 totals here. And as you can see on the 400 chart, now the ProMax actually has passed up the stock head. So if you had a race cam, I believe the ProMax head would actually make more power than the stock cylinder head. The Kill Devil Icon, 1069, so it picked up a bunch. The PDD Stage 1, 1075, barely better than the Icon. I mean, they're close enough that it really depends on how much time the cam dwells at each lift opening. So I would call those a tie as close as the numbers are. And then the PDD Stage 2, look at that, 1158. So it's still way ahead when you get that bigger lift cam. If we did the same chart, but we added all the way up to the peak flow, the numbers would be different, but that's not where the engine runs. This is a stock engine or drop-in cam. This is your race engine. All right, so now I've got the exhaust overlaid of all 5 of these heads. Now this is the same data and information from before, but now it's on a graph, so we can look at the exhaust and compare each of these 5 heads. You'll notice most of the heads are very similar up to the mid-lift range. The outlier here would be the Kill Devil Icon head. Looks like they could use a little more work in their, the low lift region, their valve job. Maybe that could be fixed with some CNC porting, but obviously they take off pretty good up higher, so it's a good port design. And obviously it's fun to focus on the top end. Wow, look at the big top end flow of the power driven head. But what really matters, the lift range of the cam. All right, so now I have all 5 heads overlaid on the same graph. Now we're focusing on the low lift numbers where the stock cam actually lifts. So the stock cam lifts 325 thousandths on the exhaust lobe. So here we have all these heads at 350 thousandths. That gets us to that 325. We have their totals right here. And I've overlaid them right here in a graph. So you see the ProMax, the total lift added up, the total flow numbers in that lift range was 663, stock 681. So the ProMax, I believe, would be behind a stock head on the exhaust flow with a stock cam or drop-in. PDD Stage 1, 703. But look up here at the top. You got KDD Icon and PDD Stage 2 tied at 721. So these 2 heads identical on the exhaust side up here with a stock cam or a drop-in. Now let's go to a race cam. The race cam I have, the Stage 4 race cam, has 400 valve lift on the exhaust side. So here's the 400 lift numbers here. I've overlaid them in a bar chart so it's easy to see here. ProMax 785, stock 808, so it falls even further behind the stock when you get an aftermarket big cam. PDD Stage 1, 837, PDD Stage 2, 869, and the Kill Devil comes out just a little ahead at 871. These ports are essentially identical as far as flow. I don't think you're going to see much difference there. But technically, the KDD came out a little bit on top on the exhaust if you have a race cam. All right, so finally I have all 5 of these heads overlaid on the same swirl chart here. What's swirl? That's the RPM that the air mass swirls within the cylinder. So we have a swirl meter on the flow bench, and it tells us the RPM of the whole air charge. So the PDD Stage 2, 2900, Stage 1, 3600. Remember that stock head peaked at 3900. ProMax, 4400, pretty high. KDD, 4500. Now, truth be told, all of these peak swirl numbers happen at a lift range beyond where the cam even lifts, but it's a fun number to have. We generally shoot for 3,000 RPM of swirl. If we have 3,000, we've never seen any ill effects. When you're designing a port, if you make it swirl really hard, you are giving up some of the port energy that could be CFM in the cylinder for swirl. So excess swirl, in my opinion, is not desirable if it's more than you need, because you're giving up port energy potential that could be used for making power. Case in point, the Power Driven Stage 2 head. 2900, we gave up a little bit of swirl over the Stage 1, but we gained a bunch of CFM. When you're looking for peak power, swirl does not make power in the top end. Swirl makes low RPM power. When you're trying to make power, you want CFM. So the Kill Devil Icon, awesome head, lots of swirl. In fact, I know when they CNC port them, their swirl numbers go down because they too know that more CFM makes more power. But just kind of a fun chart to look at. Yes, swirl's important, and all of the heads have them. In fact, they all have plenty of swirl. Now that you guys have all the data, you can make your own decision on which Powerstroke head is best for your truck build. I'm a little bit biased. I designed 2 of the heads, so I know which one I would run on my build. However, go in the comments section below and tell me which head you would run on your build now that you have all the data and all the information. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And finally, tell us, which heads would you like tested next? We try to do unbiased testing here. All this testing is repeatable, and I'd love to test some more heads for you.